we'll get it going. So let's go. If my face does not look familiar to you, please become fast friends with me because I'm already friends with you. But my name is Bailey Ritter and I'm originally from Pontiac, Illinois. And my favorite plant species of all time is the ginkgo tree or peony. I haven't decided. The ginkgo tree has one of the coolest leaves. And I remember it was the only thing that I knew, like I could identify as a kid. Like that's the only leaf that I like knew. And if you're from Pontiac, which there are a couple Pontiac friends out there, you would know that there's only one ginkgo tree in all of Pontiac, and it was my goal to find it as a kid. Anyways, so if you're from Pontiac, go find it. But I am the youth advisor for the Ocean Project, and at the very end, I'll be sharing how to get involved with the Rising Blue Network and show you where to sign up for the brand new newsletter for even more ways to get involved. But ultimately, I am your MC. I am literally just creating space for these two right here to show up and shine because they are so outstanding. You guys will just see why I just needed them to be on the webinar for the start of the year. But I'm so excited to introduce you all to Apurva Iyengar and Grace Doleshel. And I met these fabulous young leaders when I helped mentor and coordinate Sea Youth Rise Up, which is a collaborative effort between the Ocean Project, Big Blue and You, and Youth Ocean Conservation Summit. And I got to help mentor and coordinate the 2019 delegation, which included these two. And I traveled with them to Washington, D.C. to advocate for increased policy to protect and restore our ocean and our climate, which, as you all know, are two of the biggest interconnected issues, I think, facing our planet and society today. And we had so much fun attending Capitol Hill Ocean Week, which is hosted by National Marine Sanctuary, and participating in Chow Hill Day. Chow is Capitol Hill Ocean Week, but we just call it Chow, where we attended so many cool meetings with politicians and staffers talking about what they could be doing now to ensure our future is sustainable, abundant, and healthy. But that's just how we met. Let me tell you a little bit more about why these two are so awesome, and then we'll get into it. So Grace Doleshel is an 18-year-old environmental activist and student at Oregon State University, pursuing a bachelor's in science and environmental public policy. Currently, she works as a satellite summit coordinator for the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit and coordinator of environmental affairs with the Associated Students of Oregon State University. Grace also has experience internationally, look at her go, as she attended COP25 and the United Nations Climate Conference in Madrid, Spain. She also is a trained climate reality leader and has worked in multiple advisory positions for AZA accredited conservation facilities and served as a 2019 delegate for Sea Youth Rise Up. Now, Apurva, on the other hand, nature has always played an important role in her life, which is what inspired her to commit to being a conservation leader. And that's also why she plans to pursue a major in environmental studies as a part of the Tufts University class of 2025. Wow, that's like so soon, but also feels so weird that you're in a graduating class of 2025. Apurva is the founder of Youthify, which you all will be hearing about very soon. But it's a youth-led organization that gives otherwise isolated young environmentalists a platform. She also serves as a member of the Earth Echo Youth Leadership Council, a squad leader for the 2020 Ocean Heroes Boot Camp, the U.S. National Coordinator for Think Ocean Global, and a member of the steering committee for the 2021 U.S. Youth Advisory Council for the UN Ocean Decade. Wow, did I get that? There's like so much you guys have done, but I'm like, wow. Anyways, let's get to it. Thank you again for being here. Also, if any of you have questions for these two outstanding young creatives, leaders, founders, you name it, please automatically put it in the chat. We'll have time, about 10 to 15 minutes at the very end to ask them. But I have questions for them. So let me stop sharing my screen so I can see them full. There we go. So my first question for both of you is, we met at Youth Rise Up, which was about a year and change ago, almost 2 years ago. But before that, what inspired you to get involved in this work? You know, who or what kind of led you down this path to being like, you know what, I got to do something about the way this future is heading, and I'm going to stand up and be a leader. And either of you can go first.
I can jump in with that one. I started when I was a freshman in high school, so I was about 14 years old, working at Point Defiance Zoo Aquarium in Tacoma, Washington. I was never really an athletic kid, but my parents always encouraged me to do clubs or some type of extracurriculars. If it wasn't athletic, something else. And I really loved animals. We grew up right in a town, small town, right at the foot of Mount Rainier. So I grew up going to national parks all of the time. We used to take national park trips, my family and I, every summer. We'd take a road trip to different national parks. So I was very interested and in love with nature. And so when I was encouraged to then go out and do some type of extracurricular when I got older, when I was in high school, I looked to volunteering at the zoo. They had an amazing volunteer program. A lot of zoos do have amazing volunteer programs for young people. And so I started at that. I moved my way up in that position. I started just working or volunteering summers, and then I became a senior guide, which means I was a part of their leadership development team. I worked year round. I helped mentor middle school volunteers, high school volunteers. And I actually got to go to, that was in Washington State, I got to go to Olympia, to the Washington State Capitol, and lobby for a couple of bills that were of interest to the zoo. Sometimes the zoo will lobby for those bills. And that's when I got interested in policy. And then what we did at Point Defiance, we actually hosted a satellite summit for the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit. And so I went to the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit my first ever year at the zoo. I went as a participant, and then I was able to come back later and be a part of the planning team. And that inspired me. So my love of animals and my love of the environment inspired me. But then the people that I met along the way too inspired me just as much. So the mentors and the people that worked with me in that volunteer program at the zoo inspired me. The people who I work with now, or I work with in my position at Oregon State, in my position at the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit, they continue to inspire me. Bailey and Apurva both inspired me, and I talk about See Youth Rise Up all the time because that was when I decided really and solidified that I wanted to go into policy. And so I think people have inspired me just as much as the natural world has to protect it.
That is such a good answer, Grace. And I also talk about See Youth Rise Up all the time, probably too much for the people who have to be around me a lot. But it honestly was one of the greatest experiences of my life, so I cannot recommend applying enough. But as far as what inspired me, I think I had a slightly different path from Grace. I definitely grew up a lot outdoors, but kind of mostly in my backyard, like making mud pies and just messing around and failing at climbing trees. I fell out of trees a lot as a kid, so I don't really do that anymore. But I honestly got involved in environmental work super late, I think compared to a lot of people. And I think Bailey has said this at some point, better late than never, or it's never too late to get involved. But I was like a junior in high school when I actually kind of started to notice how much waste that we create. And it's kind of a little bit more depressing, but that was honestly what inspired me to start doing environmental work, was just realizing, you know, that everything that we create nowadays, it just kind of stays there. And that idea of permanence as a teenager was so completely scary, because the idea that something that I created or that I, you know, threw away could be in our world forever just totally blew my mind. And I knew at that point that I really had to do something about it, because I just couldn't stand the thought of, you know, plastic straws and all of the stuff that I just used honestly without thinking about it that much would just end up in a landfill somewhere and stay there for all of eternity. So that's kind of how I became inspired, really. And then going from then, I've been involved in a lot of different things related to environmental conservation, initially very much at kind of like the youth program level, with See Youth Rise Up and the Earth Echo Youth Leadership Council, and then kind of working my way into doing some of my own stuff and personal projects that I'm specifically passionate about.
I think Apurva, if I'm correct, you once told me there's this huge misconception when we say, oh, we're just going to throw it away, because there is no away. Like that's not a thing. Like it doesn't go away. It's here in a lot of ways. It's here in a lot of circumstances. So I think I always think about that when I think about your story. So you both kind of touched on this a little bit, but the theme for this month's webinar is taking your advocacy, your activism, whatever you're doing for our planet to that next level. And, you know, I kind of wrote a little bit about this on social media, but to me, I think it's always really important to preface this conversation by saying, like, really a level, like, you know, there's tiers you can take it, but I don't know about the both of you, but my advocacy journey has been more like a it comes and goes. Like there's very cool high moments where you're doing all these cool things, and then you're like, today I'm going to compost, and that feels really good. And it's like not passing a piece of legislation, but it like feels equally as important. So I do want to preface that for all of you, you know, whatever this next step looks like, this next level, make sure it's authentic to you. And that's what these two will be talking about. But you guys kind of hinted about what you have done. What does that next level look like to you? What is taking your activism and the things that you've done to a whole nother level?
That's a good one. Grace, you want to start off?
Yeah, I can start off with that. I think, and I know I was just talking to Bailey about this right before the webinar started. I always was just focused on getting to like the largest level as possible. So for me, that was international. I wanted to go to the UN. Once I knew that I kind of wanted to do environmental stuff for the rest of my career, like that was it. I wanted to get to the UN. I wanted to do international stuff. I wanted to be a name that people knew, and I wanted to do things that to me seemed really big. And then my first year at Oregon State, I went into a professor's office hours who I knew did climate work, and he offered me an extra badge that he had to the UN climate conference. And so I got to go, and I got to end up at the UN a lot sooner than I thought I was. I had just turned 18. I came back and it was kind of like, what now? And then this year I got this position with Oregon State, with the Associated Students of Oregon State Student Government as the Environmental Affairs Coordinator. And to me, that very much was like, because I'm in my senior year now of my degree. So for me, this was very much, this is my senior year. I'm going to do this job. It's going to be great. It's going to make me connections. It's going to get me where I want to go when I graduate. And as I started doing this job, and as I started getting more involved in things on a local level, I had done local policy work, but I had done it so quickly. I lobbied for a couple bills. And then I went to DC with Youth Rise Up, and I was like, cool, I'm on a national level now. I'm doing national stuff. I'm not doing state stuff anymore. And what happened when I got the job with OSU was I started to kind of sit and reflect. And I think too, going virtually allowed me to, a lot of these larger trips that I had been planning on for national and international work got canceled. And so I had to really reflect on myself and where I wanted to be as an activist and what I wanted to do. And what I realized is that you don't always have to be in the largest or broadest or most well-known position as possible to make the impact that you want to make. And I have been working really hard now in my position at Oregon State with my work just in the state of Oregon as I've been in college, of what impact do I want to make as an environmentalist? What do I really want to do? And at the core of that question, what I really want to do is I want to make the planet a safer place for people. I want to make the planet a better place for people. I want to make the environmental movement intersectional and accessible to everybody, because right now a lot of sustainability and a lot of environmental efforts are not accessible to everybody. Using reusable utensils or reusable straws or some of those items, that's not accessible to everybody. And so for a lot of my activism thus far, I was saying, oh, do these things, and I realized that that wasn't making the impact I wanted to make. And so now I think the next step for me is, a year ago, if you would have asked me, where do you want to be when you graduate? I would have said directly to DC. I want to go directly to DC. Now I want to stay in Oregon for a while. And that wasn't something that I really ever anticipated until a couple months ago, when I started realizing that I can make a big impact and work at a small level. And as I have started scaling back and working just localized, I've done a lot more. I was able to co-write an environmental bill that is now going through session in the Oregon legislature this year about food insecurity and sustainable urban farming. And that is something that I would have never got to do if I would have just continued to push towards getting as big of a position as possible. And so for me, I think the next step is really just solidifying what is the impact that I want to make and how can I make that right in my own community where I am right now. And for a lot of people, like Bailey said, that isn't a linear path. For a long time, I was going straight, and now I feel like I'm going backwards, and I'm going back to my roots where I started and trying to rebuild and do things that I didn't do the first time around. So it isn't a linear path. It is very circular, and there is ups and there is downs to it.
Apurva, would you like to add anything?
I would. I don't know if I can go up after that, because I'm not sure I have anything quite so deep. Grace, that was such a cool answer and such an interesting journey that you've had. So for me, honestly, the next step kind of came from COVID, honestly, because I think leading up to that, that was really like the first year or so. I would say like that was like my first year landmark of really being like involved in environmental work was honestly when COVID hit. And at that point, I was kind of like, oh my God, all of this stuff that I had planned, all of these like things that I was going to attend, all of these events and conferences, and like I was going to speak at something, it was like all canceled. And I was like, crap, like, I don't know what to do next, because I had kind of based, the next 6 months of my life on this. And I was like, when I had started planning all this stuff, I felt like I was in a really good place with my advocacy and my passion. And I was like, okay, yeah, I know what career I have. I know what I want to do. I know what comes next. It's da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And then COVID happened and everything was just kind of, the slate was wiped clean. And at that point, I kind of started to think, I was like, okay, well, all this stuff is gone, but like I have more free time. So like, what is something else that I can do? And I started to realize that a lot of the things that I had really been looking forward to were things where it was really focused around me and my like journey as an advocate and, my career path, which is all fantastic. And definitely things that people should be thinking about and, trying to make yourself happy and, being fulfilled through your career and through the things that you pursue. That's all great. But I realized that I hadn't really been looking at my advocacy from more of a collaborative perspective and thinking about, the power of youth as a collective. And that's kind of where the idea for Youthify came from, is that if we took everyone who was like 18 and under today and we asked them, would you fix climate change if you could? We would fix climate change. Like if that was the decision that we went with, we could fix climate change right now. But the fact is that that's a big section of the population that just really doesn't get a voice in any of this stuff, right? You can't vote until you're 18. Most people can't, serve in office until they're like 30 at the most, right? So it's a very like lopsided system when you think about it, that everyone under 30 is being represented by people who are all over 30, right? So I was kind of thinking about that and I was like, all right, what if we could get everyone who turned 18 next year to vote, right? We got them all to vote. I'm sure some of them would vote for candidates who didn't necessarily support climate change action and support, dealing with environmental justice issues. But wouldn't like the vast majority of them vote to support all of these things that we've been working so hard for? And I was like, okay, so why aren't people getting involved? Like I'm personally very involved, right? I care about these issues. Like I want to vote. I can't wait till I turn 18 because I turned 18 just this past December. And I was like, I need to be able to get involved. Like, why is no one around me? Like, why aren't they this desperate? And I realized that it came from this place that a lot of the young people in my generation are at, where they're neither here nor there, right? They're not kids who can really place like complete faith in the adults around them to do the right thing because, they read the news. That's really all it takes. They have their own thoughts and opinions, but they're not adults who can actually like take action on these issues. And so they're kind of really disenfranchised as a population. So when I started thinking about, advocacy and activism from that more like collaborative and collective lens, I realized that there was really something that needed to be done to bring all of these people together and to give people who maybe didn't know a lot about these issues a chance to get involved, a chance to discuss them, and a chance to take action. And that could only really ever happen when we work as a collective, when we work together. So that's kind of where the idea for Youthify came from, and to some extent that is kind of shaping my next steps, because I'm looking for ways to bring people together instead of kind of looking for things that I can do personally, right? Like that's obviously still a focus for me, how I can live a more sustainable life and how I can make a bigger impact on the people around me. But at the same time, I'm always looking for ways to, connect a friend that I have to someone who might be able to mentor them or help them with a project that they're working on, or something like that, just to build greater connectivity and collectivism within our society. Because I really think that at the end of the day, that's what's going to help us solve the climate crisis. That's what's going to help us, address all of these issues, is working together.
I love that. Speaking of collectivism and getting people together, quick shout out to the Sun Foundation and Karen, who is on here, who is going to get all three of us together in Peoria this past year for the Clean Water Celebration. And that couldn't happen, but shout out to you guys. But as you both were talking, something that I just learned recently and have been reflecting on a lot is this idea that I think as a society, we're kind of taught to plan our journeys based on goals that feel very physical, like get into my dream college and get a PhD and do all of these things. And the way that we really should be looking at our goals and our trajectory and our journey is based on value. What are our values and what am I doing today, tomorrow, next year that, speak to that higher calling, that big value that I want to live my life by. And you'll never be disappointed if you continue to live by that. And there's nothing too small or too big, that you can do and achieve. And when you both were talking, I was like, that's their like life's thesis statement, right? Like I want, Apurva, going back to you, like this collectivistic bringing people together, and Grace, you talking about the intersectionality of the movement and making sure people are safe. Do you think so I'll preface, when I was a kid, I was very much like, I just want the world to be great, like and perfect and beautiful. And that's that, very broad, because I just was like, I care about everything. But my question to you both is, do you feel it's important to have like a very focus on your advocacy and like a very narrow, not necessarily narrow because there's so many intersections between things, but a very like crafted, this is the purpose of my advocacy, this is my thesis statement, this is what I'm going to achieve? Or do you think like it just comes, today it's this, tomorrow it might be something different? What is your two's opinions on whether focusing your advocacy on a particular statement or movement, or keeping it like, hey, today I'm going to decide to do this and tomorrow it might be different?
I think personally my activist journey has been very malleable. It changes a lot. And so when I first started, I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now, working on some of these activism things. When I first started, it very much was, I love animals and I want to make the world a better place for animals. I want to help the climate crisis because polar bears are losing ice or whatever. And I still very much love animals, but that's not the reason that I'm doing this anymore. It's very much more so because it's a movement of people. And I think as I have learned more in the field of environmentalism, and I think too, for a long time, I only wanted to do environmental policy, and a very specific environmental policy too. And then I started doing fellowships or internships or working with representatives who don't necessarily work on environmental policy, but they work on food insecurity policy. And that ties into environmentalism. And that is impacted by the environment and by the climate crisis. Or they're doing economic policy, and economic policy very much is indicative of climate policy. I think really when I started to change my thinking on that and my goals as an activist was when I was working on a cap and trade bill here in the Oregon legislature. I was doing a political fellowship at the time, and what happened was that bill would put a cap on the amount of carbon emissions a corporation was allowed to emit. They could trade with other corporations, but it basically set a carbon emission cap on to try and address carbon emissions and carbon footprints in Oregon. And it was so poorly received by specifically the Republican Party that every single Republican representative and senator, aside from I think one, walked out. Because how the Oregon legislature works is that you have to have a certain amount of representatives there to hold a vote. And so even though Democrats had a majority rule in the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, they still didn't have enough Democrats to just hold a vote without any Republicans being there. And so a lot of Republicans walked out, and it was tough because it became a very polarized issue very quickly. And I was criticized for polarizing it when I was trying to just communicate what was happening. And what happened was a lot of people who didn't like that bill, or a lot of Republicans who walked out on that bill, didn't walk out necessarily because they didn't think that we should be taking action on climate. They walked out because they were concerned that manufacturers were going to leave Oregon and go into states that didn't have as strict policies. And so it really just came down to economics. And that's when I realized that you can make an impact on the environment, and the environment has so much of an impact on so many other things that I don't just need to be focusing on the climate crisis and animals. I need to be focusing on economic policy. I need to be focusing on food insecurity policy. I need to be working on education policy, healthcare policy. It all ties together. And so that's when I started realizing that it's okay, I think, to have a goal and a path that you want to go down, but to keep an open mind and realize that just because you're not working on something that's directly impacting animals, which is maybe why you got into it, you are still making a large impact that is going to make the change that you want.
So can I answer both? Is that applicable?
Yes, of course.
And the reason that I say both is because I think having like a really narrow kind of specific focus with your advocacy is fantastic for meeting people and building connections and like finding your niche essentially. So like I wouldn't have met Grace or Bailey actually if I hadn't kind of chosen ocean conservation as a more specific niche, because I met both of them through See Youth Rise Up, which is kind of like an ocean conservation specific focused program. So to that end, finding your niche and like really honing in on one thing is really nice because it lets you essentially build a community within that niche. Like the environmental community is tiny as it is, but there are even like smaller kind of groups within that, and they're super supportive of people who share their interests. So it's really great to be involved in a lot of kind of activities and groups and conferences and things like that that involve that one niche. However, just personally, I don't really have a specific focus like that. You know, there are like a million different things that I want to do and want to pursue. And I have so many different ideas for things that I'd like to work on in the future. Obviously, there are a couple of key issues that I'm more passionate about than others. But, you know, I don't think at any point I'm ever going to have like that one thing that's like the rest of my life, which is why I'm not going to get a PhD in any one thing in specific. You know, I'm passionate about plastic pollution and climate change and environmental justice and all of these other things that obviously relate to each other in a lot of ways. So you could say as a whole, my focus is just environmental issues. But I think that having like diasporic interests is kind of cool because it also lets you explore a lot of different things and learn a lot of different things, right? So like plastic pollution, for example, has a lot more to do, you know, with medicine, honestly, like talking about like plastic gloves and face masks that have non-biodegradable materials in them just based on the pandemic, right? So it has a lot more to do with the medical field and kind of keeping things sterile and safe than does climate change, for example, right? Climate change, however, relates to environmental health, and that relates to environmental justice. So it's all kind of interconnected. So honestly, it's kind of hard to have a focus like that, right? Like if you advocate against plastic pollution, how can you not think about all of these other things that are going on? So that's kind of my non-answer to that question. It's just that, there are kind of good and bad things to each of them. And it's really just about doing what lets you get, a lot of community and support, but at the same time, doing something that you feel like is impactful. Like if your state already has fantastic plastic pollution laws, maybe go for climate change, or maybe try to get the plastic pollution laws even better. So it's really just kind of about figuring out what works for you specifically. And I think that you can kind of do a combination of the two, much like how I'm doing right now, and find something that works.
I love that. Those are two very fruitful answers, but they were also super nuanced, because I think, as who could have ever, I mean, probably some people predicted a global pandemic, maybe, but who could have ever, right? Who could have thought 2020 is the year? And it's changed so much of how we do what we do. And so, next year, hopefully not caused by a global pandemic, but next year might be completely different, and we might have to change things up yet again. So yeah, I think it's always free flowing, and as long as it's authentic to you in that moment, like, good for you, keep it up. Like, that's what I always think about. But I want to go back, Apurva, to something that you said, because I think maybe people watching this now, both live, but in the future, if you are kind of on that side where you're like, I want to get involved, I'm taking little steps, but I'm not at the space to like affect policy. That's great. Like, good for you. Like, it's, I think that's kind of the misconception about the movement as well, is that, there are actions that are more worthy than other actions. And so merge your passions. Like, if you care about healthcare, or if you care about the social justice movements, if you merge those with your environmental passions, like, the more intersections that you can find, the more enriching this whole process will be, both for you, but for the movement, because we constantly need to be learning, kind of like what Grace was saying, from what other movements, what other action people are taking. That was kind of tangential, but it just got me thinking. I guess kind of similar to how I started this, a next question that I want to ask both of you is, what's your advice for people who are maybe wanting to take that first step in their advocacy journey, be it ocean conservation, plastic pollution, whatever that looks like for them? What's your advice for people who maybe aren't surrounded by kind of the great communities that we all have been, that have really molded us and helped shape us to the places that we've gotten to? What's your advice for people first starting out? What's that thing that might feel big or might feel small that they can take tomorrow to kind of take that personal action into their life and start this journey?
I think something that I have been talking a lot about, I know we've been talking a lot about it with the Youth Ocean Conservation Summit, we've been talking a lot about it with the work that I do at Oregon State, is looking at COVID and looking at everything going online, and how can we change the way that we do things to make a lot of the work more accessible. And I think that online communities, none of us like working virtually, and I definitely do miss a lot of what we did in person, but I think that virtual environments are an incredible way to foster a community. A lot of the people who have supported me the most do not live near me. I mean, some of the people who I talk to the most and who have mentored me the most in environmental work are people that live across the country, or people that I met one time, or people that I connected with through something online, such as a webinar like this, and continue to foster a relationship with them and talk to them over social media. And that is something that, if you're all watching this today, you're already doing that. If you're watching this webinar, if you are engaging with people, if you have a social media account, you're already doing that. You're already creating communities for yourself. And so I really am trying to express and tell a lot of people that we have the ability to have communities both online, virtually, and in person, and that we should be taking advantage of all of that and not just focusing on person, or not just focusing virtually. And I do think that when we come back after COVID, when people get vaccinated and things start opening up, that we are going to see a lot of these hybrid models of stuff online and things in person. And so never underestimate the power and the ability of working virtually and creating virtual environments and communities for yourself, because that is a way to continue to get into this work, even if you don't have the support right around you.
And guess what? You don't have to have started a nonprofit, be whatever to join these groups. Like, we're looking for you. Like, join. Like, we will welcome you with open arms. Believe me. Okay. Now, Apurva. I just knew Apurva was gonna just like steal the floor. So I was like, wait, let me get my thought in.
No, you are always the floor stealer, Bailey. That's you. But I will just add that I actually kind of just want to rip off your point a little bit here, Bailey, that we need people, like we need nurses who are environmentalists. We need, people who work in technology that are environmentalists. Just because you're really passionate about the environment, that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be your only passion. We really need a lot of people who do what they do in the daytime, but also advocate for our planet. On their days off, they go to rallies on the weekends, they volunteer to do beach cleanups on their vacations. We need people like that as well. And so that's really my biggest piece of advice, is that, this doesn't have to be your life. For some of us, it's kind of our life, but that doesn't necessarily have to be you if that's something that doesn't work for you and you have other things that you're really passionate about as well. The other thing is, I love Grace's point about finding a virtual community. I think that that's fantastic. And just going to shamelessly plug Youthify a little bit here, because that's really what we're trying to do, is provide a virtual community for youth environmentalists from around the world. So if any of you all are interested in that, please check it out. But I will also just add on to that I've had some really fantastic experiences with virtual communities as well, sitting with two of my favorite environmental people on the planet here right now. And yeah, finding your community, finding your niche is a great way to go, as well as just, looking for little things that you can do, right? If it's going to be really difficult for you in your life personally to like switch to reusable straws or like use shampoo bars instead of shampoo bottles, then don't do that. Do something else. Think about all of the ways that you impact the planet, and then pick like one thing to reduce, reuse, recycle. Pick one thing to make more sustainable. So maybe that's like riding your bike more. Maybe that's, I don't know, charging your phone with a solar panel, right? It could be anything. It just depends on what works for you. And if you pick that one thing and start with that one thing and then make that a part of your life, you can eventually kind of pick up more of them, and you'll be able to kind of achieve that sustainable life that you want to live. But you can just start simple, you can start small, and it can be as easy as that. And as far as like getting involved and getting active, finding a community is really great for that. But honestly, Google is your best friend, right? If you just want to know what's going on in your area, just look it up. There's definitely someone around you trying to pass a bill on plastic pollution, trying to, fight for carbon caps, fight for environmental justice. Find them, email them, and get involved. It's really as simple as that. And I think people a lot of times get very daunted because they're like, oh my God, this person made plastic pollution illegal in California. Like, how could I ever email them? And it's like, yes, that sounds so scary, but at some point they were you and they were looking up to someone else like that. So don't worry about it. Like, honestly, if you email them and you hear back, fantastic. If you email them and you never hear from them again, that's also okay. It's okay to reach out to like a couple of different people if you want to get involved and then see who bites. And if they email you back and they're like, no, that's fine too. And it happens because sometimes people are kind of at capacity and they need people who are more experienced than you are, but that's okay. There's always places for you to build experience and grow. And honestly, like attending workshops and webinars like this are a perfect way to gain more experience and gain access to more opportunities. So definitely keep doing that as well.
I completely agree. Also, never underestimate the power of a DM. I DM so many people. There are some people on this webinar that I DM because I'm just like, you're great. Like, if you're watching, like, I'm a fan of you. Like, I literally look into all of the cool work that all of you are doing. Like, and so if you find somebody like that where you're like, man, I love what they do, and you want to get involved, or you just want to like, hey, can we have a virtual coffee? Like I've done that so many times, and I've gotten people saying, I'm really busy. And I'm like, okay, I'll check in a couple months. And I've gotten people being like, actually, yeah, that sounds like so much fun. So like Apurva was saying, like email, but if DM, direct messaging, my dad watching is going to be like, a DM, direct messaging. If that feels accessible to you, do that. If writing a letter feels accessible to you, do that. Like do what feels good to you. Sure he does. Sure he knows what that is. I have even more ways to get involved for all of you. So if you know how QR code works, basically just put your phone up there and act like you're taking a picture. But I wanted to highlight and shout out some cool opportunities to get involved even further. If you're looking for a community, if you're just looking to attend more things like this, I got you covered. So here on this left-hand side, left-hand side. Scan this first QR code if you want to subscribe to the monthly Rising Blue Network newsletter. You'll see more opportunities like this and some of the really cool youth organizations that you can get involved with that will be highlighted there. The second QR code is to join Youthify, which I can say as a Youthify member is really awesome and fantastic. There's really great resources, really a cool way to meet people that are in kind of this movement. So give that a check out. This third one is the brand new Gen Geo community website, which is presented by National Geographic. Sign up. Like I'm sure that there's kind of vague information about, not vague information, but kind of vague about what's happening with the Gen Geo community, but sign up for this community using this third QR code and learn a little bit more about the Young Explorers and what we've been up to. I'm so thankful the Rise Up webinar has been supported by Nat Geo, so I'm super thankful for them. And then this fourth QR code, I talked a little bit about the at the beginning about Capitol Hill Ocean Week. So if you are interested in attending the 2021 Capitol Hill Ocean Week, which is free and online, click this fourth QR code and get involved. And if you want to click all these QR codes, fantastic. But we're getting to the end. So sadly, we are at the end of this fast January Rise Up webinar. I cannot believe it. I want to thank Grace and Apurva so much for being here today. These are ways to contact them via social media, but I'm sure if you DM them and want their email, they'd be happy to give that to you as well. And definitely give Youthify a follow as well. They have some really amazing workshops. I was so fortunate. Grace and I both were super fortunate to be a part of their internship workshop a couple months ago. So that was really great. But again, if you are on social media, tell us what level that you are taking your activism, your advocacy to by using the hashtag RiseUpWebinar. And I hope to see you all in February. Thank you for being here. I hope you all have wonderful evenings, days if you're watching this in the day. And again, thank you for spending your time with us. You all are amazing. Keep being the change that you all want to see. Trust me, it is going to be well worth it when we have a beautiful and healthy, abundant future.